Good morning to all, and welcome to session 4 of our Saint Macrina Centre seminar on Gregory of Nyssa. We're looking at this work on the soul and the resurrection, which is comprised or cast as a dialogue between Gregory of Nyssa and his sister. All right. Now, we have some themes in mind. We have some questions in mind that we'll return to. We ended last time by reading out a story called The Student by Chekhov. This wonderful prosaic image or prosaic realization of some of the truths that we're trying to participate in, partake of, as it were. And we saw in that story a shift from recitation, someone reciting a story for the sake of another person, but without warmth in their own heart. A shift from recitation to holy response or co-response, where we see the student begin to realize in himself the truth of what he's saying. This is an example of what we called yesterday exchanging a pattern of thinking for a rhythm of breathing. To exchange a conceptual schema for a way of being with others. But it takes discernment to know what the difference between recitation and holy response is. Yesterday, David Goa suggested that discernment is only possible when the ground is integral. That's where we're beginning today. Discernment is only possible where the ground is integral. The student's ground became integral in the story, as it were, through his drawing near the integrity of the two peasant women who lived truths that they could not recite, but they were living them. So the ground, our ground. We have shied away from definition. Our ground is not definition. Our ground is not setting something out and providing a boundary around it. Our ground is integral movement. That's the grounding of our being. Movement in integrity, not definition, not frozen horizons. And this distinction matters. We'll turn to the text briefly. This distinction matters in how we think about certain images that we are given. Now, this is on page 84. It's the brief little paragraph that stands alone. Beginning, so the divine judgment. So this is Gregory musing. So the divine judgment, I said, as it seems, does not primarily bring punishment on sinners. As our discourse has just shown, it operates only by separating good from evil and pulling the soul towards the fellowship of blessedness. The divine judgment, as it seems, does not primarily bring punishment on sinners. That's not how to understand it. As our discourse has just shown, it operates only by separating good from evil and pulling the soul, that's discernment, and pulling the soul, drawing near, towards the fellowship of blessedness. So this is law and judgment considered really quite differently. Sometimes we tend to identify the word law with definition, defined boundaries. The word in Greek, which forms the essence of this thinking, nomos, means, it doesn't mean definition so strictly. It's an activity. It's a kind of gathering, arranging, establishing, and preserving activity. Gathering, arranging, establishing, and preserving. Phenomenologists call this the moment of institution as a movement, but that's separate. Nomos is gathering, arranging, offering a measure for, establishing, giving life to, and preserving, sustaining. So if that's our idea of nomos, gathering, arranging, establishing, preserving, then judgments, by which we can also use the term, judgment, which can mean compassing or recognition here, compassing in the sense of measuring and spanning, or recognition in the sense of belonging with one's own. But judgment in this passage really means discernment. And so what Gregory is expressing in this response to his sister in the middle is that the Logos discerns and responds and distinguishes rather than condemns. That's the activity. That's what judgment and law mean. Discerning, responding, and distinguishing, and then affirming, of course, rather than condemn. And that is integral movement. That's the movement of and unto integrity. We could say that the gathering for the sake of, as a term phrase, gathering for the sake of, inherent in nomos, in the Greek version of what we call law, is like the gathering for the sake of, or gathering unto, that we find in integrity or concurrence, as we've been understanding these words over the last few days. So nomos is akin to integrity and concurrence here. Gathering for the sake of. And our discerning, which follows, is an essential part of our being, a key aspect, our discernment, not something without which one may be understood. We see it as a deep synergy with the divine, discernment. So he says, separating good from evil and pulling the soul towards the fellowship of blessedness. This is also drawing near. Our discernment is meant to bolster, encourage, fortify our drawing near. It's part of the same process. There's not one and then the other that we can separate in mind. So our being drawn near to God, we know that this is not a one-way activity. It's part of synergy. And so it's not just us drawing near, but it's our being drawn near to God as well. And we also have the suggestion, the gesture, the phrasing that our Genesis and our telos are as one in this chapter, are as one. Our grounds and our ends are as one, and both are phrased as being drawn near. Being drawn near is the heart of our being, and it's the fulfillment of our being. So this is on page, I'm just going to read out a couple of lines from page 83 over to page 84. It's right at the beginning of chapter 7, page 83, just over to 84. And this is reflecting, as it were, on the very strange alien notion of judgment, which sometimes seems to creep into our tradition. 5 lines up from the bottom of 83. For it is not out of hatred or vengeance for an evil life, in my opinion, that God brings painful conditions upon sinners. It's not that. Dismiss that. When he seeks after and draws to himself whatever has come to birth for his sake. Okay. So it's not out of hatred or vengeance for an evil life that God brings painful conditions upon sinners. There's no passion in God. When he seeks after and draws near to himself whatever has come into birth for his sake. That is the center of life right now. She's saying that is the concurrence. That's the integrity of life. He seeks after and draws. There's ecstasis, there's desire, as it were. Draws to himself whatever has come to birth for his sake. But for a better purpose, he draws the soul to himself, who is the fountain of all blessedness. For a better purpose, for the sake of something which we don't understand and can never understand. For a better purpose, he draws the soul, synergy, to himself, who is a fountain of all blessedness. The painful condition necessarily happens as an incidental consequence to the one who is drawn. She's setting that down again. She's saying the center of it is the drawing near. The emotions or the passions which we attach or we think God has attached to that drawing near, those are lesser. They're real because they concern us, but they're lesser. And then down that page is just the phrase which is as beautiful as a phrase from Gregory the theologian. 4 lines up from the passage I read before, so the divine judgment, the end of that paragraph. As God draws his own to himself, that's the phrase. She's talking about something else, but the underlying ground, as God draws his own to himself. As God, we are our own, my own is God's own. And so when we think of the question of what is most deeply my own or what is your own, i.e. the center of our being, it's not a question to set in juxtaposition with another question of, so then who are we worshiping? It's not cut and dry like that, where we define this and then define that and then define the relationship between. It's about phrasing and flow. Okay. So we have, first of all, drawing near as the beauty common to all creation. And then we have the phrasing of creation as God's own, as God draws his own unto himself. Now, drawing near or being drawn near is the essential movements of our integral being. Drawing near or being drawn near is the essential movement of our integral being. So our being means drawing near. Our being means drawing near. And although thinking and being are distinct, so what we think of drawing near does not exhaust the reality of drawing near. Although thinking and being are distinct, as we learned yesterday, drawing near seems the horizon of what we could call godly being. If we try to put it in a non-contrasting way, not in an is or is not, but in a compassing, I think we could say drawing near seems the horizon of godly being. I think we can say. The contrast is implied there. That's one thought. Continuing with drawing near. Drawing near is synergetic. We've established that. Macrina has taught us that. Drawing near is synergetic and demands our free participation. We'll read this explicitly in the text in a moment. Drawing near is synergetic and demands our free participation. Now, our free participation is phrased by us in terms of movement and time and intent. Movement and time and intent. Although none of these, movement nor time nor intent, equally not with thinking, are at one with being. Movement is not at one with being. Time is not at one with being. Intent is not at one with being, nor is our thinking. And so we are freely participating. This is the paradox. We are freely participating. The drawing near of our being to God is completed, as it were, beyond our own thinking, beyond our own movements, beyond our own sense of temporality, beyond intent. Our drawing near to God, the drawing near of our being to God is completed, fulfilled beyond us. In other words, our synergy does not ultimately depend on us. I think we can still fall into this trap thinking that it's my decision, it's me. It doesn't depend on us, although it is who we are, and it is what we are, and it is how we are. But our free participation is not control or management. And synergy continues beyond time, movement, and intent as part of our drawing near. Drawing near can occur, or it can occur or may occur as an experience of refinement. David Goa said on session 1 that communion in all ways refines us. He phrased this truth that we're trying to get at. This refining, an image of this refinement that happens in drawing near. And remember, drawing near is the horizon of godly being. So we're building our image here. On page 88, there's a lovely image of this drawing near, this communion which refines, in one of Gregory's just beautiful images. Page 88, the last 6 lines before the final paragraph. For although this bodily covering is now dissolved by death, you will see it woven again, renewed. You will see it woven again from the same elements, not indeed with its present coarse and heavy texture, but with the thread respun into something subtler and lighter. Isn't that lovely? Subtler and lighter. So that the beloved body may be with you and be restored to you again in better and even more lovable beauty. Even more lovable beauty. Wherein you commented yesterday about how even now for us, love and beauty are practically infinite. It's hard for us to conceive their end. We nevertheless are still quite foreshortened in our perception here. Even more lovable beauty, something subtler and lighter. So the movement of drawing near refines us. The movement of drawing near refines us. Let's ask a question. If movement is proper to the person, and so far we are holding it is along with Gregory and Macrina and Maximus and others, but Gregory and Macrina here. If movement is proper to the person and drawing near is the appropriate movement of being, if movement is proper to the person and drawing near is the appropriate movement of being, does that make identification and inertia evil? If movement is proper to the person and drawing near is the appropriate movement of being, does that make identification and inertia, as it were, evil? I'm using the term evil in scare quotes here. Evil. Is that our shift in horizon? Is that what we are meant to discern, with the rest being fantasia, those eyes scratched out of demons on the walls and refusing to paint the devil in vivid colors because it's a fantasia? Is that what we're about here? That's a question. We could follow it. What sense does evil, the term evil, actually have? What sense does it actually have? If we follow Macrina's phrasing that all is and will be, and because it's beyond time, has been gathered into and unto the beautiful, the divine, the divinely blessed beautiful. In other words, what does all being is blessed mean? What does that mean for us? Now, just final 2 comments before we head into the text. Thinking of things like this, we have to take care. Often we can think that a truth of insight which seems vivid is just to be applied willy-nilly. But we have to take good care with how we, as it were, with the incarnation of our truths. One way of putting this is to think of the vertical and the horizontal movement of truth. Vertical. So there's a truth that is vertical that comes to us, but then it also has to be applied. It has to be shared. It's not just given to one, it's with us. So we have thesis in need of elaboration, always. Any idea, any thesis, any thought placed needs elaboration. And the danger of not taking this seriously, I'll just point to two lovely bits from Macrina. One's on 89 and one's on 92, very briefly. The danger of not taking elaboration into account. On about 4 lines down from the top of page 89, Macrina says, some do violence to humanity by association when they assert that, etc., etc., etc. The idea to which she's responding might seem pure in itself, but its ramifications, its elaborations, as she says, do violence to our humanity. And then on page 92, reflecting again on a certain kind of alien idea, she says, so what will be the life of such a person under the spell of this idea? Since he must either be cautious towards everything, because all are related to him, or be harsh even towards mankind, because they are not distinguished from the other species. Therefore, we must reject such a theory from our discourse. And so, although Macrina is not, and Gregory and our tradition in general, are not interested in definition, that doesn't mean that there's no sure-footedness in the phrasing of truth. But it has to do with what we're talking about, drawing near. And we'll see this come out in the readings. It's this shift between a concept indicating something and something being filled with the divine. This contrast between vertical and horizontal is also, could be figured as a contrast between revelation and, or not contrast, joining of revelation and incarnation, or being and making. We've used those terms recently. Or character and creativity, to refer back to some recent trends in Russian thought. This vertical and horizontal, revelation, incarnation. Well, clearly, that is the truth of the Logos become flesh, which we have mused over and pondered. The Logos become flesh is saying that truth is one, and truth and depicting truth as one, newly. It's new, it's a revelation. And also this is why Maximus says, the incarnation is a mystery without end. It seems to be the plainest gift. It's a mystery without end. Okay, let's turn to the work a little bit. We have 2 chapters today, chapter 7 and chapter 8. The chapter 7 is titled in English, Why is Purification Painful? And I was going to muse over the term purification, but then it became kind of annoying. And I thought, so a purification, then we're assuming that after that follows the next stage of the spiritual life, then we're assuming that after that, and so we're back in time. And so my only note is, why do we fret at the mystery? I think that's why what Macrina is saying here. Why are we fretting at the mystery? Why are we applying these strange temporal terms? Chapter 8 is on transmigration or metempsychosis, as we heard in the first session. Transmigration just means that thinking extends as far as being, that all being is knowable. There's no mystery in transmigration. So it's a very Greek, ancient Greek, in terms of ontological monistic vision, which is not what Macrina and Gregory are sharing. All right, the first passage is, please turn to page 86. And we'll follow the same kind of format. We'll read them out, and then I'll offer a few thoughts, and then we will return with our questions to the text and open it broadly up. Page 86, just near the top, beginning in the second line, just over to the top of 87. What's Macrina discerning here? What is she phrasing? Not defining, not stating. What's she discerning? All right. So when the person who is struggling morally has thus put away all that is alien to him, which is sin. So sin means alienation. That's all it means. It means at a distance that we think is unspannable, which is the opposite of drawing near. When he has thus put away all that is alien to him, which is sin, and taken off the shameful garment of his debts, what he owes, what he thinks was meant to be his own, he enters into freedom and confidence. Note that we pursue freedom here, but not confidence. Freedom consists in becoming freedom consists in becoming like that which has no master and is under its own control. This likeness was given to us by God at the beginning, but has been veiled by the shame of our debts. Here's a sentence. All freedom is one in nature and belongs together. All freedom is one in nature and belongs together. Consequently, therefore, everything which is free will be joined with its like. Virtue has no master, arete, excellence, has no master. Therefore, everything free will be excellence, will be virtuous, in virtue. For that which is free also has no master. But indeed, the divine nature is the source of all virtue. Hence, those who are released from evil will be in the divine nature, so that, as the apostle says, God may be all in all. This word, which says that God becomes all in all, seems to me to confirm clearly the idea which we have examined previously. For while we carry on in our present life in many different ways, there are many things in which we participate. I like that sentence. While we carry on in our present life in many different ways, there are many things in which we participate, all good, such as time, air, place, food and drink, clothing, sun, lamplight, and many other necessities of life. Necessities of life, good, of which none is God, of which none is God. The blessedness, which we await, however, does not need necessity, does not need any of these, but the divine nature will become everything for us. The divine nature will become everything for us and will replace or renew, restore everything, distributing itself appropriately. We've deepened that word considerably. Giving itself appropriately for every need of that life. This is clear from the divine sayings that God becomes a place for the saints, a house, a garment, nourishment, drink, light, wealth, dominion, and every concept and name of the things which contribute to the good life for us. It's really important. And every concept and name of the things which contribute to the good life for us. He who becomes all will also be in all. In this, the apostle seems to me to teach the complete annihilation of evil. If God will be in everything which exists, evil obviously will not be among the things which exist. For if one should suppose that evil existed, how would it remain true that God is in all? If evil is excluded, not all things are included. But he who will be in all will not be in what does not exist. Okay, that's an immense passage. A couple of thoughts before we continue immediately following. So she's talking here about drawing near. She links it with belonging together. All freedom is one in nature and belongs together, draws near unto each other. That also means belonging with. So our being is not a being singularity. And she says, I love this like I love some similar passages in Maximus. She says, while we carry on in our present life in many different ways, there are many things in which we participate. The variety of life in which we participate is meant to be freeing. It's meant to encourage us not to give in to identification, not to give into inertia, not to give into conclusion. And just musing on the phrase, of which none is God, near the bottom. And then shortly thereafter, she says, and God becomes, and then names all those things again. Of which none is God, and then God becomes. There's no identification between creator and creation. There's no ontological monism, which is one of the things that church fathers were responding to in Greek thought, because of the violence it would do in association with humanity. So, of which none is God, and then God becomes. There's no identification of creator and creation. That's idolatry. But then she says, God becomes saints, place for the saints, a house, etc. And every concept and name of the things which contribute to the good life for us. So God does become every concept and name, every noetic drawing together, and every calling forth of all that in life, which is part of our drawing near to the divine. All that is part of our drawing near has become godly for us, if it's in synergetic sincerity, let's say. Not identified, but in, not identified with all, but in all. This is a relationship, or sometimes figured as a permeation, or we could say a suffusion, if we want to get risky. God in all, and God is all, through which, in apophatic movements, we draw near in communion with the divine. What she's describing here, that he's not to be identified with, and yet may be found from within, with, through, and beyond. That's apophatic movement right there. Not is and is not. It's not that God is not light, or God is light. It's how that is drawn into the concurrence of our synergy and offered up in our prayer, holy desire. All right, the second passage, Michael, if I could ask you to read a little bit, and actually just immediately following to the end of that page, except the sentence ends on page 88, but essentially page 87, beginning with, so what should we say? It's a little bit sooner than I indicated initially.
So, what should we say, I asked, to those who lack courage to bear their misfortunes? We should talk to them like this, my teacher said. Dear people, it is useless for you to grumble and complain at the necessary order and sequence of events. You do not know towards what goal each part in the universe is being directed, because everything must be united to the divine nature in a certain order and sequence according to the skillful wisdom of the governor. Our rational nature came to birth for this purpose, so that the wealth of divine good things might not be idle. A kind of vessels and voluntary receptacles for souls were fashioned by the wisdom which constructed the universe, in order that there should be a container to receive good things, a container which would always become larger with the addition of what would be poured into it. For the participation in the divine good is such that it makes anyone into whom it enters greater and more receptive. As it is taken up, it increases the power and magnitude of the recipient, so that the person who is nourished always grows and never ceases from growth. Since the fountain of good things flows unfailingly, the nature of the participants who use all the influx to add to their own magnitude, because nothing of what is received is superfluous or useless, becomes at the same time both more capable of attracting the better and more able to contain it. Each adds to the other. The one who is nourished gains greater power from the abundance of good things, and the nourishing supply rises in flood to match the increase of the one who is growing. Those whose growth is not cut off by any limit will surely continue to increase in this manner. Then, when such prospects lie before us, do you complain because nature proceeds by the road which is ordained for us towards its proper goal? Otherwise, our course cannot reach those good things if we have not shaken off from our soul this heaviness which weighs us down, this earthly burden. Unless we have been cleansed by better pursuits from the attachment to it which we have acquired in this life, we cannot be united in purity to that which we resemble. But if you have some fondness for this body and you are sorry to be unyoked from what you love, do not be in despair about this either. For although this bodily covering is now dissolved by death, you will see it woven again from the same elements, not indeed with its present coarse and heavy texture, but with the thread respun into something subtler and lighter, so that the beloved body may be with you and be restored to you again in better and even more lovable beauty. Somehow, I said, the sequence of our discussion appears to have brought us to the doctrine of the resurrection, which seems to me, on the basis of scriptural reading, to be true, trustworthy, and indubitable. But since the weakness of human thought relies more on comprehensible reasoning to establish a conviction of this kind, it would be well not to let this topic go without consideration. So let us reflect on what we ought to say.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. There's immense mysteries phrased here. On page 87, for the participation in the divine good is such that it makes anyone into whom it enters greater and more receptive. That is that's the heart of Macrina and Gregory's sense of drawing near. It's not just us being pulled, as it were, a unit being pulled towards another unit. Here he talks about our genesis or our formation, uses images of formation, vessels or voluntary receptacles. We understand that we are that being for which endless fulfillment in communion is given in love. Humanity is beings for which endless fulfillment, and that's hard, it's a paradox, endless fulfillment. We often think of fulfillment in terms of time. For a while, then it stops. Endless fulfillment in communion is given, it's a gift out of love. Or increase without end. Increase without end. It's a I'm not sure what the term, it's a phrase or an image that we cannot comprehend. It extends beyond our thinking. Also here, she seems to be saying that in our co-response, in our responding to what is given, our co-response, our synergetic receptivity, our receptivity is based in our synergy, or in our breathing in and out, our transformation of bios to zoe, as we said, the rhythm of breath, both receiving and giving. We find ourselves in a loving abyss, as it were, a loving abyss, meaning joy without measure, joy beyond measure. Abyss just means beyond measure, that which cannot be sounded. And this is an image of an abyss. This is also apophatic because we understand what joy means, or love, or part of it, but we don't understand what beyond measure means. And so that which we know as our own now will be translated unto a much deeper fulfillment, which we cannot foresee, although we know it now. It's part of our own now. It is our own now. It's real. But the gift is not comprehensible. Okay. And I'm just touching, of course, just touching barely these passages. We need to return to them. Let's look at the last passage, then open things up. David, if you wouldn't mind reading, this is pages 95 to 96. The bottom of 95, beginning with, "It is not possible," just to the very end of the chapter, and then end of 96, please.
I'm sorry, you said the bottom of 96?
Pardon me, the
The
very
bottom
bottom of 95, just
90.
over to the end of the chapter. Yeah, so just 3 lines up from the bottom of 95. It is not possible.
Right.
Or wherever you.
It is not possible for the benefit which comes from virtue to develop in those whose nature has its beginning from the opposite. If our life is divinely directed, we must also agree that evil does not begin our life. But if we come into being through evil, in every way we will live entirely according to it. So this will make nonsense of the judgment after this life and the recompense for deserts, and whatever else we say and believe in the hope of eliminating evil. For how is it possible for the person who has come into being through evil to escape from it? How would man make a start towards choosing the virtuous life if his nature gets its principle from evil, as they say? None of the irrational beasts attempts to speak like a human being. They use the voice which is innate and natural to them, and consider it no misfortune to be lacking in speech. In the same way also, if men are thought to have evil as the source and cause of their life, they could not even begin to desire virtue, because it would be outside their nature. But in fact, all those who have purified their souls by reason have a zeal and desire for the virtuous life. So this clearly proves that evil is not older than life, nor did it provide the first principles for our nature. Instead, our life is governed by the wisdom of God, which directs the universe. When the soul has come to birth in the manner which pleases the Creator, then by its free will, it chooses that which accords with its inclination, becoming whatever it wishes by its power of choice. We could learn this from the example of our eyes. Sight comes from nature, but non-seeing from choice or accident. What is contrary to nature may occur at some time instead of what is natural. If one either voluntarily closes the eyes or by some accident is deprived of sight. Thus, we can say both that the constitution of the soul is from God, and since we do not conceive of any evil in connection with the divine, that the soul is free from the necessity of evil. When it comes into existence in this manner, it is led by its own inclination to what seems good to it. It may live in the darkness of deception, closing its eyes to the good by choice, or by a plot of the enemy which besets our life, suffering an injury to its eyes. Or else, looking in purity towards the truth, it may move far away from the passions of darkness.
Thank you, David. A few thoughts on this, again, remarkable passage, and then we'll open it up. Here, she is saying that Genesis means telos. Our beginning means our end. And it's cast in the terms of formation, our formation. We are formed in a certain way. Earlier on in the book, Macrina talks about synergy being conformation. We're being conformed to the divine. I searched for it immediately, but I couldn't find it just now. So we are formed, we are given formation. Our effort is towards conforming with the gift of life. And we understand salvation, as it were, in terms of transformation, the transformation of our being. Formation, confirmation, transformation, it's the same thing, being refined. The second thing, she does not speak of telos or end in terms of necessity here. Our Genesis means our telos, our formation means our transformation, but not in terms of necessity, not in terms of either time or inevitability. It's not a certain amount of time before it happens for sure. And it's not inevitable that it does happen, at least according to the imagery here. We're not to think in terms of necessity, but rather, she says, we need to think in terms of nature. Think in terms of nature. We haven't thought about nature deeply at all here or elsewhere lately. So we might a little bit now. What is the relation between our being and our nature? What does nature or physis mean here? What does it mean? Is it the impulse for movement? Is it the seeking completion in another? Well, we're wondering. Another way of putting that is, what does Macrina's idea of nature draw near to us? How does that draw us near, right? How does that draw us near to the divine? We also have an image here of zeal or holy desire as being at the center of our being. All those who have been healed in light of the Logos, have a zeal and desire for the fulfillment of excellence in life, for the fullness of goodness in life. So zeal or holy desire is at the center of our being. This is a comment David made when he was speaking about the prophet Daniel the other day. Holy desire at the center of our being. Zeal or holy desire here is that by which we know, that by which we have confidence, as it were. It's just interesting thing. And then at the bottom, we have this idea of inclination, led by its own inclination. So the idea of freedom comes up here, maybe. The idea of ascesis comes up here, maybe. If the inclination is what may go awry, is that part of our nature? Regardless of if it is or not, it will be, but regardless, what are we trying to heal here, or purify, or make whole? What's the misperception here? Okay, so those three sections. Let's open it up to broader dialogue here. We have three broad questions in mind with which we may begin or not. We can begin as we please if something has struck us out of one of these last three readings, but just to remind us of the questions which we've had in mind throughout. First, we asked, what is the ethos of freedom expressed here by Macrina? Is freedom infinite, like love and beauty? How is freedom related to the simple? That's the first set of questions. And that I was thinking of the passage on page 86 here, but it's a broad question. We also have not sounded freedom yet. Second question, it follows from the first. How do concurrence or co-responsiveness or co-responding, are responding in like manner to the divine? How does concurrence, co-responsiveness, or co-responding figure in our sense of synergy? Synergy is one of the mysteries we've been circling around here, but I think we're deepening it in a beautiful way, but we want to keep at it. How do concurrence, co-responsiveness, co-responding figure in our sense of synergy? And then third, to what are we drawing near? To what are we drawing near when we phrase communion with God as ever moving or all renewing? Those are images of Macrina and Gregory. Or increase without end, also from this chapter. Or in all ways refining. That's a phrase of David Bowe's earlier this week. To what are we drawing near? Remember, God is not of these concepts, but within these phrases, we may find that energy which draws us near. So to what are we drawing near when we phrase communion with God as ever moving, ektasis, all renewing, apokatastasis, in all ways refining, or increase without end? So any one of those three questions we begin and circle back to the text.
Could I throw out just a kind of snappy kind of apophatic heuristic that came to mind when you suggested or wondered what the relation is between our being and nature, or our nature. And it's quite a kind of fruitful heuristic. Pierre Hadot used it in his wonderful book, The Veil of Isis, and it's a Heraclitean fragment, an aphorism attributed to Heraclitus, Fusus cryptophe the phile. Hope I have that right. Nature, Fusus, loves to hide. And I mean, that's such a productive and enigmatic thought, but it kind of tempers whatever we say, and I think it's not Heraclitean by accident. I think there is implicit in this notion that this is a kind of movement without end, our relationship with nature in this sense.
Do you see that lovely little nature loves to hide, that aphorism, that phrase gathered from the horizon? So nature, our own nature. Earlier in the text, Macrina also uses the word hidden, and we said it's not deceptive. Do you see any relation that could be interesting between those two?
Well, I mean, the same passage occurred to me when we were, wondering about what word translated hidden. That's why I wondered if, perhaps we don't have you have the Greek, whether it was the word kryptos, because then it would suggest that phrase. I mean, phusis kryptethai phile.
So looking at this last passage, what's hidden or not clear in nature? I mean, clarity and hiddenness are of a whirling whole here. What's she saying?
If I can add some of my observations about how we're thinking about this. The idea of uncertainty, or in the apophatic tradition of moving beyond what we can conceive, moving beyond what we can grasp within our human conceptions. And knowing that, I loved the last question that you had in the email about what are we drawing near when we phrase communion with God as ever moving, all renewing, and increase without end. And this to me really speaks with the idea of holding tension between clarity and hiddenness. And because I am also a scientist at heart, I keep on coming back to the Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty, that as we as human beings can perhaps pinpoint the location of any particle, of anything, that we cannot then understand the momentum of that particle, where it is going or where it has been. We could discern the momentum of a particle, but we could not specifically or precisely locate that particle. And so in thinking about hiddenness and clarity, I think that there is an essence here of what Macrina and Gregory are saying. There is an essence here of uncertainty is part of what that synergy means. And rather than knowing where precisely we are going, where precisely we have been, what direction we are moving in, we need to, as human beings, release the idea that we have to be certain about anything in order to be in communion with God. That's not to say that there is nothing certain about God, because we are certain that God is there. She's certain about Genesis and Telos. She's certain about beginnings and ends, origins, and returning to those origins. But if we think about ever moving, all renewing, increasing without end, these are both in terms of our relationship to the divine, but also in observing aspects of the divine in creation. These are cosmic and universal principles of things that we're finding out, that the universe is infinitely increasing all the time. And how do we understand that? Perhaps these things in the universe that we observe teach us a little bit more about what it means to be drawing near to something, thinking about God perhaps as an unknowable process rather than as an unknowable entity that we can never quite pin down, but that we are drawn to because of our nature of being created with that divine love, the attraction, the magnetic, molecular, deep down cosmic connection to divine love.
That's nicely put.
If I can ask you, Kendra, uh, with your little discussion of Heisenberg and uncertainty, is that another way of simply speaking about not presuming?
I think so. And I think part of why my mind and heart has gone to that place is in the chapter where she talks about reincarnation and transmigration of the soul. It puzzled me a little because it didn't puzzle me about the ideas of where the soul is going, but it puzzled me a little that the underlying goal or practice or drawing near practice within a lot of traditions that do discuss transmigration or reincarnation are very much about the annihilation of the ego, which is something that I hear echoing in both Macrina and Gregory's words, in that we have to draw near to God and to not presume that we know what that means in order to really be in union. And so I think that's where my mind went, in that as I'm reading through these things about we are not who we think we are not who we might presume to be. We cannot presume to know God's mind or the nature of God. That these things are really speaking to a tradition of annihilation of the ego in favor of drawing near to the divine. Yeah, so don't presume. Absolutely.
If I could just speak to that a moment. A few books ago, I wrote almost that exact thing. And one of my editors pushed back again a little bit. He just said, it's not the annihilation of the ego as such, because we need it, but egoism, that is the enthronement of the ego. And that'd be the only, that's the tweak I had to put in it. So I thought, well, I'd pay forward that tweak to this conversation, in the sense that depending on how we define ego, right? And so there's no eradication of the personhood. In fact, we become more human as we're drawn in. And in that sense, whatever, I think the way you were using it would be how I had used it. That is ego as as shorthand for egoism, and that's really been in the reading earlier, talking about how the likeness had become, so to speak, tarnished or stained. That's what's being cleansed out of us, and it's really important to theology, I think, because the huge Protestant misstep had been in thinking like that the image was gone, and now at our very core we don't even, that's all broken. And for Gregory and Macrina, they seem to be saying, no, that this is a stain that's cleansed as we are drawn in, so that the image was never eradicated. The likeness is restored as in precisely the move you're describing. So at least that's how I'm starting to articulate it, so it doesn't sound like any true aspect of our true self is annihilated in a monistic way. I hear the lawnmowers have started, so that's all I'll say now.
We can't hear it in the background, but I sympathize with your sympathy for the editor, because that's always bothered me intensely in a way. And I think that in this passage we're drawn in, oddly enough, by this thesis, which was conundrum, which I've never really understood until thinking about it recently because of what we're reading, that evil is an absence. And but I'll just deploy the heuristic that I had suggested, because it's precisely within ourselves. There's so much of our nature that remains hidden, and so there's a kind of this moving forward and drawing near is also a kind of recovery of something original. I think that's what Macrina was suggesting earlier. And so I think that's quite salutary, because otherwise, you know, there is this kind of notion that in our depths we're depraved, a kind of idea of original sin that, you know, maybe there's some version of original sin that, you know, is okay, but it can lead into a kind of pretty dark view, which would almost be complicit with the view that Macrina is denigrating, that we originated in evil. I mean, this is originated in something which is supposed to be absence of the good.
If I can just add what I think is a little bit of a context to this. When you read the history of religions and you look at many of the kind of myths about how human beings came about, how the world comes about, I mean, it is remarkable how common the human being and the world is understood as a fall, is understood as some, I mean, we see it in Plato, some notion of the loss. It comes about through the loss of perfection or the ideal. In many of the religious traditions, there's a sense that human beings are a downgrade, or being a human being is a mistake, or an illusion. This is an illusion. It is a diminution. It is a mistake. And I expect that in their time, they had a pretty visceral sense of that, being a pretty common notion. It's a not uncommon notion nowadays, in a great variety of ways. So this matter of being and nature. So here I'll just wonder out loud. Being is not something. It arises, if I've understood her, it arises in communion, or it arises in the concurrence. It arises in the synergy. The word nature inclines us to think it is something. So on page 83 and 84, where there's this image of how something can grow on the soul, since I'm still very curious about whether the soul is something. But if something grows on it, then it appears to be something. And I would say that egoism is exactly that. Egoism is who you think you are. And that's the great human challenge, is to figure out that you aren't who you think you are, or that who you think you are gets in the way of the world. So passions or rather appetites, to stick to my own distinction here. Appetites are like barnacles. You know, they attach themselves to the way in which we're moving through life, and they become a drag, and they can redirect, they can confuse. So Andrew talked a little bit around page 88 about this matter of movement. So I wonder if that all we can, in a sense, even begin to feel of the soul is movement. He talked a little bit about this matter of appropriate movement, and that there are two forms of it that we so often see, which is the movement to identification, which is stasis, which is presumption, which is closing off, which is prejudicing, which is idealizing, or inertia. And that those are evil. That is, those are empty. They are conditions, or a way of perceiving your life, your being, and what is in front of you. Their way of perceiving it, which gives you a very sharp prism, which reorders the world. And it reorders it around something that doesn't exist.
It's such a it is such a kind of existentially felt paradox that what we experience as evil, the very proposition that it doesn't exist. I mean, that's been a stumbling block for me. Oddly enough, the discussion of I'll pass over this kind of lightly, of eros, kind of seems to have, in the subsequent hours, sort of liberated me from this idea, because we often think that evil, or rather that pain, is equivalent to evil, and yet we couldn't have a kind of erotic delight without some, as David Hume once mentioned in a delightful little essay, some admixture, not we're not obviously overwhelmed by pain, but some admixture of pain and pleasure. And so if we identify pleasure as the good, or evil or pain as evil, the way utilitarians in effect do, try to quantify these things, I think we do prop up a false notion of the good, and we prop up a kind of positive notion of evil, which is really an absence. And so it's only when we identify a kind of pain with evil that it becomes something positive and something, but that's to misconstrue even something like pain, which is passing, and again, something we can look at in this through this heuristic of hiddenness that I was hinting at or suggesting.
I appreciate your hesitance around the issue of evil, but I have for some time thought that evil was a real illusion.
That's a nice way of putting it.
It's a real illusion. It's an illusion which is kind of concretized, but that it comes about through a profound misappropriation of life. And what's behind it, well, I think what's behind it is something trying to be born, but it's deeply, deeply miscarried. I had one other thing that I was kind of interestingly, it prodded me a little bit. Andrew, your comment about in the section on divine judgment and law, and the word nomos, law, as the arranging of activities and the and you use the term institution. And that's really interesting to me. I mean, this is a secondary matter, but we talk about the institution of the Eucharist. The institution of the Eucharist. It's a formal way of speaking about the Eucharist. But when you think of the Eucharist, the great gathering in thanksgiving, the coming together in thanksgiving, in communion, I really like to think of that as the law. Yeah, that's a great way of understanding the law. It's the ordering and the embodying and the carrying forth of gratitude in communion. Thanksgiving. So thanks for that, Nomos.
That's a lovely reflection, and let me just open it back up in the conversation a little bit then. And we might come back to vertical and horizontal ideas here. David, your reflections, which immediately preceded, and Michael and others, really beautiful. This idea of institution, it's a naughty word now, but we often take it as a fact or a noun, and there are cliched phrases, not even phrases, sentences with which one confines tradition or the church or something in terms of some institution. That's not what we're talking about. The institution, which is movement, by which I meant gathering, arranging, establishing, preserving, this nomos. This term first came to mind, or first came to attention a while ago after a conference in Kingston. Actually, it was the first Modern Horizons conference. Michael Burke, you were there, I think. And we were sitting with Ian Angus and Graham Nicholson, and Ian Angus is a phenomenologist, and Graham Nicholson is a hermeneut, as I was studying Gadamer at the time. Hermeneutics is very much interested in what happens after the encounter, how we adjust with each other, how we become familiar, how we draw near. And Graham Nicholson and I were arguing along these lines as the center of thinking is this. And Ian said, but that follows the moment or the event of institution, which is what phenomenology, the coming into appearance, of being, the phenomenon, the showing forth of being. And a long time I puzzled over that term institution, because it's not a favorite word of mine by any means. Thinking of it here, and in light of our conversations, I think that one could say that what is meant by institution is the formation, the genesis in formation. It's like setting forth the movements of which the dance is comprised, right? These are establishing the phrases, the gestures, the flowing with which the dance is comprised. We join the dance later on, partway through. That's what a hermeneutic does, a hermeneutist does. We join partway through, we encounter, we're there. But the dance has already begun. And I think what part of what Gregory and Macrina are reminding us is that the dance doesn't begin with us. We belong in the dance. It's already begun. We need to, as best as we can, try to discern what's at its heart, what is our own in that dance too, because the divine dance, of course, is the divine dance of the Trinity, and our own is drawn unto his own, or rather he draws his own unto himself. So our participation, to use this metaphor, in the dance is given of it. We will dance. How well we dance, well, that's what ascesis and concentration and discernment and everything we're talking about here. This is why, perhaps why, on that page, just to turn page 86 at the bottom, to reiterate, Macrina names a bunch of things in life and says, these are good. We participate in it. They're good. They're not God, though. They're not God. But God becomes every concept and name of the things which contribute to the good life for us. So our preparation for the dance is a preparation for the dance, or for communion. But the dance has already begun, and we're not forgetting ourselves. We're not annihilating ourselves to join the dance. We have to be there, our own selves, our own bodies even, Macrina says. And that's what we're drawing near to, deeper into the dance.
So am I going too far in saying, I have to say this really carefully because Father Florin is here. Am I going too far to say that the Eucharist is not doing something? It is being something.
The Eucharist,
Does that just create confusion? Pardon?
our thanksgiving. Eucharist is our thanksgiving. We are co-responding, giving in return, participating in that gift in which we find ourselves responding beyond ourselves, almost, as it were, naturally, but not in a way, like Michael said, in a way that's hidden. We're not sure of it. We're not certain of it, as Kendra says, but we're not uncertain of it. That certainty, uncertainty is not our boundary. That's over there. That's not our question.
So it's the discipline of responding. It's giving voice to our drawing near. I phrase it as, this requires more care, but there's such a difference between doing something and being something, being in it or doing it. Well, leave it at that.
That difference is what Christ heals too. That's the healing of the vertical and the horizontal. But we never know how ourselves. Yeah, you're right.
I would like to reflect a little bit on drawing near God, who is ever moving. We have a prayer, a morning prayer, in the prayer books, Orthodox prayer books, when we ask God to come closer to us, who is everywhere.
Present.
Oh God, come closer to us, you who art everywhere present. So although he is everywhere present, if he comes near, if he draws near us, he becomes present to us. not only as a presence which is missed by the human person, and the prayer engages the human being with the presence of God. Make human being to access, let's put it this way, the presence of God, to access it. Yeah. And
open our eyes to it. Open our eyes to it.
open our eyes and feel it. And regarding this connection to God, there is this beautiful poetry of 2 stanzas, which I posted on the meeting chat. It is the poetry of Vasile Voiculescu, a great Romanian mystical writer who was imprisoned at 74 years old in the communist times in 58, last century, and he died after 5 years of imprisonment, after one year of his release. And he has one of the most beautiful Christian poetry. And in this one, he speaks precisely about the God who is apophatic. You cannot grasp it that easy, and you cannot keep it. Let's say in this way, he's ineffable. And if I may, it sounds like this: "Oh my God, my life is passing me by. I am tired of your mysterious game." The poet feels that it is a mysterious game, this stance of God hidden and present in the same time. You are in the face of all that's going on. You are not hiding, but I can't find you at all. For thy distances are not far. You are everywhere, forgiving, guiding, caressing. A hair of thy hair separates me. This is the title of the poem. A piece of hair. I don't know how to call it. It's something which very, very subtle, which separates me from you, and yet beyond any kind of beyond, you remain. And here it's you can find Macrina and Gregory, and of course Dionysius the Areopagite. So men and women in the image of God have this impulse, erotic desire to unite with God, and God is not how to call it, is not unmoving. He's always in a move, and we as human beings, from our birth to our death, we are continuously moving. The most important thing is to have the movement in the direction of God, not in the direction of the earthly pleasure. Let's put it this in an ascetical way. Yeah. So the dance, we answer to the dance of God. It implies movement always, and when somebody is not moving anymore, he is dead from a spiritual perspective. Yeah. Some thoughts.
That seems to be implicit in the morning prayer that you say, if God is everywhere and the prayer is for him to draw closer. It doesn't suggest a running race, but rather a dance, as you suggest. And there is a notion of dance. I mean, if we can rehabilitate, just like the word institution, the word discipline, dance is a kind of discipline, and in its most beautiful form, a dance with another person, it's a kind of eros that doesn't have a consummate you know, end. So there's not some kind of purpose that is going to be finally achieved. It's just ongoing and endless. And it's a beautiful image that poem describes.
And it is always the tension which we find in the Song of Songs. This tension between the bride and the groom, and they are running always to find each other. This is maybe the beauty, because if you stop, you are dead. When you must obey, you are not free. The relation it's gone. While this is the beauty of Christian tradition, although you find God, you found God, sorry, you continue to find it without knowing, in Saint Augustine terms, that he has already found you.
This is the gospel. I think the next line in the prayer really works with the text here as well. So the Spirit of truth, who's everywhere present and fills all things. And Macrina is talking about that repeatedly, that God is all and in all, and in all in the way that God fills all things. And so, you know, in the Orthodox way by Metropolitan Callistus Ware, he just says it, you know, we're unapologetically panentheists in this sense. And or at least a Christian modified panentheism in which God is all in all.
Bulgakov.
Yeah, but then at the same time, yeah, I like how David sort of precised it for us. It's phenomenological language when we're saying, "Come close, Lord." That's like saying, "I saw the sunrise today." You know, it's really what's actually happening is, "Open my eyes, Lord, to the one who is everywhere present and fills all things." Make this reality existential for me. And so when my eyes are opened, it's as if he comes, but we know it's the one who's already present and filling all things. And so it's the turn is in me, not in him, or in the divine. And it's a lot like, you know, one of Ladika's favorite lines is from Saint Anthony, where he says, "God no more turns from the sinner than the sun ceases to shine for the blind person." You know, it's a question of us having what will waken us up to the ever presence of this one who fills all things. And oddly, it's often suffering. That's the handle that brings us into this awareness so often, and therefore ironically out of alienation into communion.
I would like, if it's okay, I would like to hear what you all have to say about freedom. Andrew has raised this question, and where is freedom in this, and what do we mean by it? Is it related to the simple? One of the ways in which freedom has been thought about by some Christian thinkers is that when we speak of the free will of the human being, what we're really saying is that you're free to say no. That's our freedom. We're free to say no to life. We're free to not enter the dance. So if you do enter the dance, If you are if you do find that you dwell in the gift of communion, where you delight in the other, I don't know. I mean, that's simple. Presence is simple. And in that sense, so freedom is an important way of trying to identify something. Perhaps before that, but our being is communion. So our free will can say no to that. Others like to point out that, Mary's fiat, her saying yes, is the kind of yes we're all invited to say. Yes to the incarnation. Yes to being birth givers of divine love in the world. So, I mean, I appreciate that way of thinking about freedom as well. But I think it's also it's a little bit provocative to me, this notion that freedom is the free will is it's part of our being. It's given. And in that sense, we, to the degree that we are alive, to the degree that we are in our being, as it is becoming in communion, we're not exercising freedom. We're in the presence of a gift.
I suppose the sin in the sense of alienation then is it, Paul in Colossians says, this alienation is in your mind, right?
Yeah.
So it is to believe that he is not everywhere present and fills all things, that God is not all and in all. And gratefully, it is only a delusion. I would say we need healing from the alienation, which is the existential reality of believing we're separate. But that's the problem, Is that kind of what you're saying, David? Or
Well, and it's called egoism.
yeah, okay.
I mean, it's what happens with us is that we remake the world in our own image. Every time our passion becomes the prism through which we see life. We're no longer dwelling in the world.
Here we have the help of the concept of purification, idealistically speaking, and I think nobody reaches this state in this life. If you are completely purified and you have no patience, bad patience, let's say this way, then freedom becomes for you the liberty to choose between different ways of serving the good, different ways of serving the good. That this should be the true freedom. But if you are in the prison of your own passions, then freedom becomes the way of serving the big idol, which is the ego, serving yourself. And everything, it's about how to serve, to fully serve yourself. So purification may help, but it is not easy, because this big idol, it's hunger of being worshipped, and doesn't want to give up his gold and to be transformed. So here the synergy, only sometimes when God picks up our being forcefully, maybe through a suffering, maybe through a friend, maybe through the encounter with the scripture, with Christ in different contexts. Maybe then the change is possible, but otherwise the devil is so good in his disguise that even when you think you are serving God, sometimes you find yourself you discover that actually you are serving yourself. So, and this brings back the topic of discernment and freedom to be free in relationship with your passions. Ascetical life, which is, we know, not easy, neither for the saints.
Yeah, I think, you know, the freedom to say no is a kind of image of stasis, because if you could, when you say no, just simply be affirming the same dull round, as Blake might say. But freedom is also something, since we're mortal beings, something that is expansive. And so this relates to the third question of endless movement. It's a dance, but it's also a kind of blossoming. You know, something like I don't mean to be trite, the Matthew principle seems to apply to the notion of freedom, because if we use our freedom simply to stay no and become mired in the same dull round, eventually we have the freedom of a rock or something inert, and the contrast would be an endlessly flowering freedom, which is endlessly expansive. And that's a way of saving one productive notion of the person, as opposed to a kind of dry kernel of an ego that has to be preserved at all cost. You know, to get back to their earlier point about the ego.
Just following Florine and Michael and David, your question, harkening back a little bit, we talked about the disjunction between being and making, and we talked about how our integrity is all of our person in concurrence, flowing towards something in synergy. And then just a few minutes ago, David, you distinguished again between being and doing. And I think that distinction, which is, as you know, only in mind because it's properly whole, but you're operating provisionally for a moment between being and doing. Is freedom something that we are do, or is freedom some part of our being? Properly, that's a question which ought to be one question of our whole integral being. But I like, Florian, I had in terms of activity, freedom, we are free to dance variously as we draw near, which is very close to what you said, that our freedom means that each in our own way, we are loving and that's holy and good. I was wondering about freedom in the light of what Macrina has said about formation and conformation and transformation. Freedom in the light of synergy really begins to show how that's not a very healthy avenue for us to go down. Freedom in terms of doing. It ends quickly, as you point out, Michael. This freedom in terms of doing, as it were, harkens back to the question of beauty that we asked yesterday. And I heard that in what you said too, Florian, where we might be mistaken in our freedom. And you laid that out nicely yesterday. You might be, you know, the beautiful can be, evil can cloak itself in beauty. And so I think that I'm with you, David, moving, seeing if there's something beyond that or different than that. I thought of two ways of thinking about it. One, freedom is being at ease with one's own. Being at ease with one's own, not fretting about it, not fussing about it.
Yeah.
Being at ease with one's own. But I think that just means that one understands one's being to be being present in healing relation. And as long as our relations are healing or loving, that is the culmination of mutually healing and loving. That seems to me some kind of perfection of freedom. But in terms of being, again, if we naturally are in healing relation with the world,
we are free.
This is, yeah, I was going to say,
We are free.
it's not fair to say that that is what Christ did, was naturally healing relation, because it was so much more than that. But that's part of what we learn from the life. And you're right, David, we are free when we are in healing. That's what I would say. Oh, and then finally, freedom in its wholeness, I think, means play, a form of play. But playing is not something that we're addressing here. But there's an ease with one's own, and there's a being present in mutually nourishing relationship, as we heard at the bottom of page 87, in play, that I think is the culmination of freedom. That's how I begin to make sense of it. But I asked the question because it stymies me a little bit. I'm not looking for something, so I don't know.
I am in thinking about this with play and freedom and choice. I just really love the last line on page 96, where she talks about looking in purity towards the truth. It may move far away from the passions of darkness. And going back into thinking about, is freedom something that we are, something that we have, or something that we do? I think that being in healing relationship with creation, with the cosmos, with the divine, this is something that we all, I think, on a daily basis have to choose. And so it is in our origins. And even hearing Macrina's word that how did she say it? That we are free of the necessity of evil because we come from good. There are things in the world that would convince us otherwise, that there is a necessity of evil within us. There has to be. And the idea that we're free of evil and born in good comes into a sort of a non-dualistic idea about how to be in healing relationship with the divine, with God, with the cosmos. And when we think about Jesus's ministry, and how he embodied the human and the divine, I think this is the essence of freedom, that we have to embody on a daily basis the human and the divine. The divine always turning toward creation, and the human always turning toward the divine. That we come back to this, and I love the notion of play in freedom, because freedom, I don't think is a static thing. Again, it's a process, and it changes depending on circumstance, location, history, even ritual can change these things of how we understand our freedom and how we understand being in healing relationship. And if we can use these words, use these ideas to think about freedom as a turning toward, for us, always turning toward God, but to know that God is always turning toward us as well, that it's a constant process of that synergy, and that should we, in our actions, in our freedom in doing, should we step away from that understanding of healing relationship, then freedom ends. As we are free to turn away, we are also free to be imprisoned, as she said, by the passions of darkness. And I think that this is a constant turning toward God, a constant participation in that freedom. It has to be constant being and doing together.
Let's keep thinking about this question and resume tomorrow. I just want to read again this beautiful line. It's on page 86. Macrina says, all freedom is one in nature and belongs together. All freedom is one in nature and belongs together. All right.